Okay, welcome. Sorry I missed last week. I assume, as ever, we don't really have anyone leading, so I'm just going to start reading the agenda aloud. Top item on it is that we don't have a CLA DCO in place. Conversation on that's been happening over on the foundation issue number 2. And yeah, I think I should ping our Linux Foundation contacts maybe about that.
Yeah, because the longer we end up waiting, the harder it becomes to recover from that.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I'll try and follow up with them this week. Sorry, I'm just pulling up that issue right now. How do we take notes in this agenda? Should I just start a minutes section down in the bottom?
Yeah, however you want. We will then convert this to Markdown.
Okay, great. Yeah, I won't bother then.
We ended up using Google Docs just for the agenda because it was easier to.
Yeah, I love it. It's perfect. Okay, so Seth. I'm just going to take notes in the agenda then. Seth says there. Seth will ping the Linux Foundation contacts. Which reminds me, I have a request from them to add the Linux Foundation to the GitHub owners. Any objections?
No.
Okay, cool.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's sort of related.
Did we feel strongly about DCO versus CLA?
Seems like we don't have a choice, but this DCO kind of sucks.
Well, we do have a choice, but people did feel strongly. One of the things that came out of that issue number 2 was that both Teddy and Dan Guido thought that we should stick with the CLA, probably partly because we already had that history, so the work of keeping it was small and it kept future options open. So it sounds like we want to stick with the CLA. I don't have strong feelings here, so I don't, both Teddy and Dan are on board.
Yeah, I don't care either way, but the person that chimed in from the foundation, from Linux Foundation, said that most projects prefer DCO.
I mean, it sounds like the DCOs, it sounds like sort of a DCO route is sort of less legal paperwork in some ways, but we already have a CLA in place, so there's no reason not to stick with it. This also means that we will need to update our charter because our charter says that we use a DCO, not a CLA. But updating our charter is, as far as I know, no big deal. We make a pull request and then we all agree and it's done. So,
okay.
Will we be able to use?
Because it seems like his message from MK Dolan said that we have to enable DCO regardless, and then we can also enable CLA if we want.
I'm skeptical of anything MK Dolan says.
Who's that guy? I have no idea.
He is our contact for he's our official contact for the Linux Foundation.
Oh,
he's like
he is an official source.
He's an official source. He's like a program manager.
Okay.
We've had some email with him before. Chris is an acquaintance of mine from a prior employer and is, I don't know, like a technical mumblety in the foundation or the Cloud Native Foundation. So Chris is like a back channel contact or a technical contact that I'm abusing. And M. Dolan is our official program manager. Sorry, Zach, you were about to say something?
Oh, I was going to ask if the CLA would basically be the same CLA we've been working with, but with Linux Foundation replacing Facebook.
I don't know yet because I know that the Linux Foundation has a normal CLA that they use that's attached to stuff when it comes up. So I think we kind of need to get that and look at it. And I sort of assume no one actually feels very strongly as long as we use like some mostly standard CLA.
I think the one that the Linux Foundation uses was pretty much the one that Dan was recommending from Apache. And yeah, I mean, it makes sense to switch away from the Facebook one, but other than that, it doesn't matter too much.
I will try and roll the ball forward a little bit on this. Sorry, I've been not pushing that a little harder.
How does it work for the DCO? because I mean there are several commits that do not have the sign-off tag on it. What happens for those?
So
in case they force us to use the DC? Oh,
probably we just track them down, or I don't know. I guess I don't think
we can ping those people. I mean, it's bad to merge stuff and that isn't signed off.
the CLA is a smaller issue because you can retroactively sign that. The DCO is something that should be signed on every commit, so that would mean rewriting history. On the other hand, we could just force push master and rewrite them all. We haven't cut a release branch. It doesn't seem like that big a deal.
Yeah.
Actually, it shouldn't matter at all because nothing we have in the past has a DCO sign off on it. So at some point,
I was mentioning from the point of acquisition forward.
Doesn't matter though. They never had DCOs. So at some point we might do a DCO. I think everything we've merged is either from someone who has said they have signed a CLA or seems like known enough that we're not too worried about tracking them down.
Yeah.
That's my impression. I'd rather we actually had it, standardized, but anyhow.
And we also have to make sure that everyone from Facebook sign the new CLA too.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Anything else people want to talk about on the CLA DCO direction?
I don't think so, but thanks for following this.
Next up on this is the dependency manager.
Yeah, so we already know we are stuck with the release until we fix this. The good news is that me and Teddy are working on it, so we will soon unblock this. There is no custom toolchain yet, which is really nice to have if we want to have reproducible builds. But otherwise, with the right libraries, we can still ship to any Linux version once we finish the dependencies work. It's really simple how it works right now. Some of the dependencies have been rewritten in CMake. Others have to be pre-built, like Boost or OpenSSL. We now support a layered approach to this, so we can have multiple sources for the dependencies. So, for example, the first source is always the converted libraries. Then we fall back to the pre-built libraries. And at the end, we always have the Facebook option, which uses the Osquery bucket they are using for the bug release. Custom toolchain, we have to look into this. I know that Teddy has already put quite some hours into this task. And he wasn't able to join, but we'll make sure to have him announce something about this in the channel.
Are you feeling good about this? Is there something you need? Do you need any broader input or support from folks?
So we have. So for the toolchain, I don't know anything about it because I didn't look at it. For the dependencies, we have to finish converting them, and then we have to test them on all platforms. So yeah, we will require help in making sure that nothing has broke during the conversion.
So at the point in time you're done, you will need people to help continuing testing pre-releases, but up until then, you feel okay with the work?
Yeah, because the build is still broken, basically. It passes the build step on Linux, but then some of the tests are crashing. Yeah, so it is a little rough around the edges yet, but we will fix it. Hopefully soon. Oh, and I'm curious about the performance regression. I looked at something in the channel. So maybe you can talk about it.
Yeah, I was. I will. So this is interesting because as I'm starting to understand it, I think there might actually be like two bugs here. One bug is basically a pretty straightforward performance regression. Someone added a column is hidden in OS X, and the way that data comes in is through the Open Directory server, which is like very non-performant. Or I mean, it's fine, but like you don't want to query it 100,000 times in a few seconds. So one sort of thing is like there's a bug around how that got introduced, and maybe that needs to be backed out, or maybe we need a different way. It's a thing Jason was commenting on in the issue that I filed. It's interesting reading through the history of that. So the thing we could talk about is like, what do we want to do with that column? Should that get pulled out of this table and shoved in another table? Should it stay in this table? I don't have a strong feeling. But the other thing that this raises to me is it feels like there's sort of a deep mismatch between the way SQLite and Osquery work together. And I'm really curious what other people think, because I feel like I don't understand this super well. So SQLite has this concept of virtual tables, right? And reading the virtual table docs, virtual tables present two interfaces, connect and create. And the first time they're instantiated, they get created. And the idea behind create is like if you have to load a big thing into memory or index a thing, you create it. And then connect is basically every select against the table. And inside Osquery, those are always the same. So we have basically named ephemeral tables. Create and connect are identical. And what this means is that anytime we do something slow, like for example, query Open Directory for all the user information, it happens every time a select runs against the table, depending on how the query planner shakes all this out. And to me, this brings up like this whole host of weird behaviors. One of them is here, right? Because like you kind of like I don't understand why SQLite isn't basically just grabbing the table, holding the table in memory, and then like joining in memory. Like it's sort of written around the idea that this virtual table will always be fast to query because it is stable and on disk. But it's not stable and it's not on disk. So one, there's cost to querying it. And two, the data can change. And this implies, because there are no transactions here, this also implies that there are data consistency errors, right? Because if you imagine two changing tables that you are joining, SQLite is requerying each of the tables for every line of the join.
That's something that Teddy called out in his talk on like Osquery gotchas last year at QueryCon. Yeah, it's an issue that might be important to you if you're querying joining some very high frequency changing tables. Like users probably doesn't matter, but
yeah. So I feel like I stumbled over that, and I was sort of kicking I feel like I want to ask the SQLite people what they think, and I don't know if there's a knob we can tune in the way the query planner works to say, to the extent you can, just cache this table, or if we're supposed to implement all of the caching ourselves, and like anything, there's just like this whole host of questions that all imply like an architectural mismatch between the two.
Well, something that you definitely have to be careful of is that the results of a virtual table could be very different depending on what the constraints are that are passed to it. So we would certainly not want it to reuse the cached values when there were constraints. So I'm not sure if there would be a way to specify that to SQLite, or if that's something that we would have to build ourselves or what. Just want to throw that out there.
The thing that I really see is like it's the within a join that feels sort of crazy to me.
well, we can implement a cache on specific things. So, for example, with the users, we can implement a cache just for not querying that API over and over and have it expire very quickly or something. But we can definitely optimize it in a way where we're not affecting the actual output of all those results.
So we have a table attribute called cacheable that is sort of documented as doing that, but I couldn't find where it was implemented.
Yeah, I was noticing that attribute that can be applied to tables as well, and was quite curious as to how that worked and what exactly it did, because it wasn't something that I was familiar with.
Can you file an issue for us to like document that or look into it?
Seth, are you saying you couldn't find any indication in the code that that attribute was actually used?
Correct. I mean, remember, I'm relatively novice at C here, so
yeah.
And it may also just get passed to SQLite. So like I could see it kind of being referenced around the either xfilter or the index or the query planner cost calculator thing, which is like x build info or something. But I couldn't actually find like if this is set, cache this data here or anything like that. Yeah, so I don't know. I feel like pulling on this thread has resulted in several weird bugs for me.
I was told by Teddy that they never actually use joins internally. They only use subqueries always. So this might be the reason they didn't, try and improve join performance.
With is a subquery, right? Or is with still a join?
Should be with, yeah.
I should double check again. I feel like I still saw this behavior using with. But I'll double check that. I'll probably have this bug become a couple of bugs. I guess maybe some questions for the group, right? Like, I guess I don't feel like I'm at a place where I know what makes sense for table caches or joins or anything. So I kind of want us to keep chewing on that, and maybe I'll make a bug for that or something. I think we have to fix the users table. I think this is basically a blocking performance regression. And I don't know if we want to fix it by slapping a cache over it, taking the is hidden attribute out, which would be rolling back someone else's PR, or doing like here's some constraints about whether or not we actually populate that data or what. Yeah.
Or maybe it was just with brackets without the with. I will have to ask Teddy.
I'm not sure if it's the same thing, but
I just looked.
Yeah. No, but I'm seeing a test named virtual table test table cache, which is testing, I think, that cacheable attribute.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the code, and it looks like the cacheable attribute is definitely used, I would say. It's used in the code generation for the virtual table code, and so yeah, I would interpret that as definitely used. So I'd be curious to see what it would look like if we enabled the caching.
I mean, so if you pull one of the branches I linked there has a table spec for users. If I remove the indexes and set cacheable, I see the same behavior. I still see it querying gen users all the time.
Yeah, it seems almost like one has to add actually the support for each table to be cacheable, at least from the look of the test itself, because they implement a table cache plugin and a special generate function, it seems, etc. So it's I don't know. It's like an attribute, but the table has to implement it.
Well, maybe the bug is just that we should implement it for the users table.
I seem to recall that Package Zero was looking into caching, and his idea was that it was bad to use it. Does anyone remember him talking about this? Maybe we should try and contact him. I also seem to recall that disabling it would also solve some of the issues that Zach talked about during his presentation.
Hey, Seth, didn't you mention that you were able to kind of like fix the regression though if you added those like constraint-aware paths in the table back?
Oh, Seth, go for it.
I think I did. If I add the constraint aware paths back, basically saying like if UID is selected, then just get PW name for UID. It fixes the performance regression. It still calls the table a lot, but now the table is fast, so you don't notice. The downside to doing that is when you have that, you're not pulling all of the column information. The is hidden column, which was introduced in a PR, only comes through the Open Directory server. And I haven't made these constraints rich enough to be like, is this column needed? Like how complicated is this getting? Like a counter proposal from Jason was to basically just revert that PR and stick is hidden into another table somewhere.
Right. Yeah. For the purposes of fixing the regression and being able to do a release, it seems like that would be a quick fix, right? Because that's what was happening before, if I understand correctly. It was still doing all those calls, and so there's kind of the deeper problem that may or may not be there. But there's also the quick way we can solve this and get a release out.
That's my guess. I found I couldn't build Osquery 332, and I didn't really want to keep trying, so I stopped. The other thing that I noticed is depending on what I do with the joins, I do get really different behavior. Like if if I just use plain join instead of cross join, then SQLite does only call gen users once, and it like holds it in memory. So there's clearly like the query planner is clearly doing stuff.
Yeah, Zach, did you have something to say?
Oh, I mean, I was just agreeing with you, Mark. I mean, I think that this sounds like a thread definitely worth pulling in terms of how the query planner interacts with the generation functions. And I would definitely lean towards a fix for the specific issue with the users table. And major changes to the way that query planning works and generation of data works in a future release.
Yeah.
So if we table for a moment the query planning discussion, what is the quick fix for users? Like if we sort of add some constraint awareness back in, then we return something without is hidden set. Like the naive implementation, which is what I did to test this, just doesn't fill in the is hidden column if you pass in UID. It basically just does a fast get PWA name lookup, which feels a little. It doesn't feel good because like we have this thing in the table spec that like you don't get if you call with this constraint. It might be the right mitigation, but it might be better just to remove the whole column and stick it in another table. I don't know. Like, how do y'all feel about that?
I'm inclined to take out the column if it's not super widely used. I'm not quite sure how averse we are to like backwards incompatible changes or whatever, but I mean, I think this is the trade-off is evident that like this table is just slower for everyone if we keep it in, but if there's not that many users, that it's not a we shouldn't keep it in.
This column was never in a released version, I think.
If the column was never in a released version, I'd say let's just back out the change and figure out a way to do it more performantly.
Or in another table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I will make up a PR to back out that other change. Maybe I'll shove it into another table as an interim or something. Or maybe I'll just ping the original contributor and be like, sorry, what do you want to do? And then I'll file something about this larger query planning, caching, mumble issue.
Do we have any tests for this kind of thing? Like just like timing how long it takes to do a query, and if it's more than like 3 seconds or something.
I'm almost sure we had some kind of benchmark test for this. No idea what happened.
They simply are not built. I recently opened an issue about it, since we didn't introduce them because Back2 wasn't. So they maybe have to be ported.
I would say let's just revert this and keep focusing on getting the build out with the dependencies and not worry about this until we have a stable build.
Well, I guess it is not an issue to merge new stuff as long as we are not adding additional dependencies.
Yeah, I mean, if the person wants to redo their PR or something, or if somebody has extra time on their hands, but.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if we had better tests to catch this, as pointed out, but we don't right now, so hopefully we just have enough of a sort of beta testing community that will find the things and fix them.
Yeah, most of the generate functions are on their own, so in case it is not already there, we could easily implement some kind of time-based benchmark.
I mean, Stefano made a bug to bring that back. I don't think it's something we need for a stable release. It's something we should do, but I don't feel like we need to block on it.
Yeah, regarding benchmark though, we really need resources, because I mean, I don't know right now actually how many benchmarks there are and how many seconds we want to wait for each one to build, to run. Also, we have to see, depending on the CI, CPU, and in general, how fast they actually run. So, meaning we are already a bit we are already a bit strict, but yeah, we will look into enabling some of the main ones, probably for benchmarks, the most the one that gives most It doesn't come the word to my mind.
Speak Italian.
No. Well, the one that shows the most useful. Okay, sorry for these blocking. My mind blocked.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to suggest, could we maybe have like a TLS server that's always running with a few packs somewhere, and the Osquery monitoring data, and like analyze that through various builds?
I'd love to come up with something like that, where I don't know if we have a stable one or if we have one that we spin up, but the idea that to qualify an OS query build, it connects to a TLS server, runs a known set of packs, and like exchange, something where basically we have something that looks a lot like an end-to-end test, where we say running this pack should result in this kind of answer with this kind of performance characteristics, and then it gives us a qualification.
Yeah, I built something like that when I was testing with the extensions and TLS connections and so on, to see if I can find regressions. But I'll need to flesh it out to make it more hostable somewhere. Or you could host it on DigitalOcean or something. And
I'm happy to chat about that. I have thoughts.
Okay. And we have a few examples with like the Docker containers where you can spin up an ephemeral OS query, so we can package it that way, and at least get a baseline of yes, TLS works and the user's table doesn't cause familiar regressions. But in this case, it wouldn't have caught it anyway because it's Mac specific.
Oh, yeah, I was about to say, Seth, since you're contacting the Linux Foundation, can you also see if they can take the signing keys somehow?
Take the signing keys?
Yeah, from Teddy.
I think we can take them from Teddy.
Because it seems like Teddy was trying to have the Linux Foundation hold them.
I can talk to them. I think probably the best thing. So my understanding from conversations with M. Dolan that a bunch of us were on email with, right, is the Linux Foundation is very hands-off. Like, we are a unfunded project, which means that like they provide us with very minimal resources, and they're also, they have this like really deep-seated, y'all should do what makes sense for you. So
that's kind of good.
like, it's good and bad, right? They're
Yeah.
basically telling us to do what we want in a way that like is viable and maintainable. So I think that we should take the signing keys from Teddy, stick them into our 1Password, and evaluate going forward. There's kind of this other question of like, we should probably go through the process of getting our own signing keys, and that's a thing I should pick up, but I haven't yet. There's a whole lot of threads to pull on about like what are Osquery Foundation signing keys like? How do we get those? What do we need for them? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we haven't done that yet. I guess the other thing is like, so Teddy can almost certainly hand us the GPG key, assuming that it's a dedicated one for Osquery and not like a general Facebook one. But I don't think Teddy.
Well, I'm not speaking.
Sorry?
We can also take the general one.
Yeah, well, could be. But like, I don't think Teddy could hand us the Apple certificate that they sign those releases with.
Sure.
So either we get our own, or like Facebook keeps signing them, or Trail of Bits signs them, or Collide signs them. Like, we have short-term mitigations for how to sign code.
Yeah.
And there's like a longer-term project of how do we integrate code signing into our build release pipeline, and where do those come from? And I don't want to answer that now because there's like a small mountain of work.
But do you think it is okay to delay this so we can have a stable release unsigned and then look into the matter in the future?
I think Teddy is willing to sign it with the existing Facebook keys.
All right. Okay.
That's what they said in the past. And as long as they're willing to do that, then we can kind of delay it and not tackle it.
Oh, I was muted. I was talking to myself. I was looking at a bunch of applications recently for Mac and like LibreOffice and GIMP and all of those popular open source projects. They all have Mac signing keys specific to the foundation, like issued to the foundation. So I don't think it should be a problem for us to get that with Apple.
I think we probably just need to get a DUNS number first.
So you actually don't need, well, you don't need a DUNS number specifically. It really depends on the kind of organization you are. We might need it, like for our use case. It's unclear, but like I was getting a developer cert for myself, and that one didn't require a DUNS number for that.
As documented, which may not be reality, there are two kinds of developer accounts. There are organizational accounts and personal accounts. Organizational accounts are documented as requiring a DUNS number. It's totally possible that there's flexibility there. If you're chatting with Apple folk, you could ask them.
Yeah, I can ask them to clarify, and I have a few contacts I can point to. But like, even when you go to Bradstreet or whatever the organization is that issues you a DUNS number, they have like a special section. Are you an Apple developer? And you click yes, and they're like, you don't need a DUNS number. Go away. You'd need it for enterprise. You're right, but for like, even if you're like an LLC, you don't need one. And Apple provides a way for you to provide your employee ID, employer ID, like your tax ID, and that's seems fine as well. But we have to investigate anyway. I don't think it's a problem to get it. So maybe I'll try to find out.
I'm writing that into the minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it feels safer to have only them own the signing keys.
Oh, own is a funny word here. It's very, very,
Yeah.
you know, having just gone through getting a lot of signing keys for Collide, right? Like,
Oh, you're a veteran.
you know, Collide owns them, but they're all on my machine, right? You know, and I administer them. So it's sort of funny. Like, we'll end up getting stuff and it will be in the name of the Osquery Foundation, but ownership is like, yeah, what does ownership mean?
Well, we can put them in KMS and have access, right? Like ACLs for who gets to sign them, but we can definitely restrict access so no individual gets the keys.
I don't know that we can for Apple. Apple's particularly weird because that's all really human driven.
Well, you can get a CSR, and Apple will sign it, but you can keep the private key in KMS and like have it encrypted, and run it. Have a worker on a Mac that signs these, that uses KMS to decrypt the private key, sign the application, and give you the signed application. But like, you have to set up the infrastructure to restrict it, but it's doable. Or,
you know, I'm probably willing to say let's not do that because I don't want to. I won't have to build all of that. It's just, you know.
yeah.
Which I guess brings up another interesting or related question, maybe, which is we don't have an Osquery G Suite account, or we haven't set up any mailing lists, and I think all the Azure stuff is running through Trail of Bits, right?
Yeah.
And someday we may want that to change, so just a thing to kind of remember.
Yeah, I mean the minimum for a G Suite ownership wouldn't be so bad. It's like $5 a user. So if we could create a 5-person account or something, we can start with that and create a group, so we could have like an official email place and potentially, a thing and we can each pay our dues and have like, if you want to be as, in this, pay $5. Otherwise, and the mailing list will be public, but this can be used for like official communication with the Osquery Foundation or whatever.
I mean, do you think that makes more sense than just like using something like groups.io or some other public-ish group thing?
I think so. I think that once we start talking about signing keys and things like that, I think it makes sense to have a centralized place, especially because Google offers the advanced security protection stuff where you can require security keys and have,
So your proposal is that we basically we use G Suite and we charge dues to effectively technical steering committee members to pay for their G Suite accounts, and that this is cheap enough that it is probably not an undue burden.
Yeah.
Can you? I think I would buy into that. I'd certainly be happy to personally fund, the first year of that. And I imagine most people on the TSC are in a similar place. So, can you open an Osquery issue, a foundation issue maybe, and propose it? And if we all,
I'll propose it there, and then we could start using that to bootstrap the rest of the infrastructure, like with regards to accounts. Like when we sign up for an Apple developer account, we need an email address and all that. So to have an official one. Zach, any thoughts?
That works for me.
Okay, I'll file an issue for that.
The real question is, can we get the Linux Foundation email addresses? I mean, we joined the community for this reason.
Well, they can give us a subdomain, but it would still be like a G Suite thing, right? I guess that brings up that we should register Osquery Foundation if we haven't yet, or whatever.
A different question is, we don't have any real way to handle money yet.
And handle money?
Or track expenses, or kind of anything. And we can kind of fudge it right now, but like at some point we should actually be able to have a pretty clear accounting of these are the things we spend money on, and this is where money comes from.
So I went through the process of setting up an LLC using Atlas, and I don't know that you need to, but it that kind of taught me a few things, which is like setting up, they were very helpful because they do all the lawyer stuff, and then they also set up a bank account. So you can have a shared bank account for this, and use it to pay dues and all that.
There was another thing that got mentioned somewhere, buried in everything, which is like some random open source startup, some startup about like helping people make foundations, or like not foundations, helping people do open source accounting, community accounting. I don't know if we really need it. I guess I also, for my own finances, I just do everything in Ledger CLI with like text files in Git.
The one that I brought up last time is Open Collective. It's sort of like it's like Patreon, but for open source projects and organizational more than anything. And that gives you a budget, so you can say I withdrew $50 to pay for G Suite, and I withdrew $99 to pay for Apple stuff and all that. So people who donate into that see where the resources come from. It would also allow us, like currently Facebook and Trail of Bits are fronting a lot of resources, like financial resources. Like it would allow them to make that visible, at least, like if you're paying, whatever, $1,000 or Slack or something, like you get to show that at least. So I'll open issues about these things so that we can track them. I assigned myself the Apple issue.
As a technical note on the Apple issue, Apple accounts, I'll follow up with you later.
Okay.
Hey guys, Lauren. If this is a good time to butt in, I'd love sort of like a high level understanding of timeline a little bit. So I was noticing on the agenda, there's a couple of things we have to close out before releasing stable. And maybe I missed it before. Do you guys have a rough date that you're tracking towards to release stable? Do we want to like publicize that at all and hold ourselves accountable to it?
I think we're blocked on the toolchain work that Alessandro and Teddy are doing.
Okay.
Like we were testing the 4.0 release a couple weeks ago, and it's mostly fine, but it's not, a reproducible build, and it's not doesn't work on all platforms. So having the toolchain would allow us to resolve some of those issues. So yeah, I don't know.
Is it working reliably on any one system or some of them?
I think if you build on Mac, it'll work mostly reliably on Mac.
So far, the only blocking bug I've found is the users table performance regression. Other than that, it seems okay across the Collide beta clients, which is just Collide.
Well, what we know is, okay, on macOS and Windows, this is not a problem actually, because the main problem is on Linux distros, where the older ones cannot currently run Osquery. So, like the previous pre-release, we are still only working on Ubuntu 18 and on. So we were initially trying to. I mean, we can still do it, but we were initially trying to have a cut release again this month. But I don't know, Alessandro. Probably it will not be stable, meaning it will still be a pre-release.
Yeah.
So one thing Lauren just asked that I want to maybe repeat is the question of, do we want to pick a date and hold ourselves accountable? And I kind of want to throw Alessandro and Teddy under the bus of deciding that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah.
For my part, I know I have time to allocate. For Teddy's part, I know that today and yesterday he told me he had like 7 hours of meeting or something like that. So yeah, we can maybe allocate Stefano some of his time, at least on the toolchain, maybe, to help out Teddy. Because I really don't know the state of it yet. For the dependencies, it's just some grinding work to do. And then there's not much of them to convert. So I'm almost done.
Okay, but we are not targeting the end of this month for the stable.
No, I don't think we can do it this
next
month. Yeah. Couple of weeks, maybe.
Okay.
So, for example, would like the end of next month be achievable? Like, assuming that you didn't get any incremental, like assuming no changes, assuming you're working on it the same way you have been, and Teddy is contributing kind of what he's been doing. Is that doable?
Yeah, it's plenty of time, even more than we need. So
Okay.
yeah, it's a good date.
Let's keep the monthly releases right now. It can always happen. I mean, we will do our best, but things can happen. So
Yeah, I think we don't need to pick a date like in this moment, but I think us as a team, maybe one of the things we can do is actually just do what Seth is talking about and think about it a little harder so we're picking a good date. But there's power to picking a date. There's momentum
you're
for
right.
that.
But I mean, I don't
So,
know.
I think we should do it.
Why don't we say we're going to try and cut releases roughly at the end of every month, and that we're going to aim for the end of August to be stable? Because I think Alessandro just said that was feasible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable. I also want to check in with Mike, who's running the team, and make sure that that's not going to be like a huge conflict with other stuff that we have to get done this month, right? Like, I'm kind of operating at an arm's distance from the Osquery team at this point, and I don't want to like force you guys to do something that's going to be hugely destructive. So let's confirm it with Mike, and then let's just have that date and stick with it. Maybe we can follow up and confirm what it is.
Would you want another pre-release by the end of this month?
Do the pre-releases help anyone?
Well, if we can take out for example, his hidden column.
Well, what I mean by that is I'm just building off of head. Like I don't need to cut a pre-release to test.
Yeah, sure, but if anyone wants to try it out.
yeah, initially the idea was to give something ready to go to test, but effectively I don't know how many have done that.
I mean, it is free of charge to cut a pre-release, so it only takes a couple of minutes to do.
Yeah, so let's target a pre-release at the end of the month then. I guess I'm coming from the place of being able to build Osquery, and if that wasn't true, I might feel differently.
Mm.
I'm going to stick the end of August as a date onto the 4001 release, which is a milestone in GitHub. Feel free to update that as we learn more, but figured I may as well just record it there.
Yeah, maybe for the next release, we can also make a build for CentOS 7. So we can have people like Chris test them out. Because he missed the last pre-release because it wasn't compatible with the systems.
That's toolchain work, right?
No, for this specific case, we can just compile directly on CentOS 7. We may have to do some manual work on it to make it build correctly, but it should be doable.
Yeah, we also need to ship the libc++ library. Or, well, we can also compile it statically, but yeah.
We're at the top of the hour. Anything else?
Sounds like not. Grub, if you've got a minute, I can chat with you about Apple dev things.
Yeah. I'm not getting kicked out of the phone room, so it looks like I do.
Other people are welcome to listen. You can keep recording, whatever, or not. So in setting up a bunch of stuff for Clyde recently, I tried to wrap my head around some of the way the Apple accounts work. You might know this already. I don't know. So Apple accounts, Apple developer accounts, whether they're organizational or personal or enterprise or non-enterprise, all must have a single account holder, single named individual account holder. You can have multiple admins, but there can only be one account holder, and that account holder can only hold one account. So when I made Collide accounts, I had to go and create a bunch of like Ceph plus Apple Dev 1 bullshitty accounts. This isn't too bad, but it is a little bit awkward as you also need to have 2FA enabled on everything, and Apple's 2FA is weird. You can have multiple 2FA things in your, right? So Apple's 2FA is this weird push thing tied into like, a Mac login.
Yep.
And you can have multiple 2FA things configured in your login, but 2FA won't activate unless it is the primary Apple ID on a login somewhere.
I think that's a bug. They've been changing a lot of stuff recently with that. I know that you're not wrong when you say that, but I know that that's not the intended.
But bug or not, it's what you will have to contend with.
Yeah.
So I mean, what I did for the Collide ones, right, is I just made another user on my Mac and called it Ceph Apple Dev, signed in once, and now I can get 2FA on all of my devices as a secondary Apple ID. But it had to be the primary Apple ID to get it activated the first time.
Okay.
So just an FYI to be cognizant of. The other thing that's kind of ugly about it, for Collide, I am the named account holder.
So the application is signed with your name?
No, the application is signed with Collide's name. I haven't actually generated certs and done this. So there is so when you left, we had the enterprise account, and I've gotten us a normal developer account now as well. Yeah. The developer account is in Collide's name, but the Apple ID that owns it is one of my Apple IDs. So basically, when I leave Collide, I need to make sure that I transfer it.
Okay.
And Apple really wants it to be a human who's named. So it's like a little awkward around the edges.
But it shouldn't have a problem with like having an account that's like apple-dev at acme.co or whatever, right?
You should be able to do that. It still has to be your name on it. It can't be like, Osquery Foundation, Apple Dev at FUI. It would be like, Victor, whose email address is the shared email address.
Yeah, I mean, they have some very weird things. Like I changed my address a few years ago, and I've emailed them like 10 times asking them to change it in their thing, and they never reply to me. So I don't know, like my official Apple ID has, very outdated information in there. It's just how they do.
Just having just gone through this like a month or two ago, I thought I'd mention all that nonsense quickly. That's everything really. I guess an interesting question about the money tracking stuff is what do we want to get out of it? And I don't know, I'll try and look at Open Collective. We can
look at it and see if they have any objections to it.
Doesn't they have like a relatively large cost associated with it?
I mean, you just sign up to a website. Like they don't charge you for it.
Well, I guess if you're processing money, they charge you.
Yeah. You hold the money for your collective. If you take care of, so they charge you 5% Stripe fees for you doing the bookkeeping, and they charge you $10 for when they do the bookkeeping. Yeah. I don't know. That might be a.
I mean, 10%. Like a question, so a question to ask is like, what do we want to achieve? I mentioned I use Ledger for all of my personal accounting needs, and given that we are a technical group based heavily in Git, Ledger would be an okay fit for us as well. But Ledger is only accounting. Ledger doesn't have like a bank account or a way to receive funds. So something that's maybe attractive about Open Collective is that they will provide a bank account and a way for random people to donate money to us.
I'm looking at the Linux Foundation. It says that they provide support with budgeting and all of this stuff.
We can follow up with Dolan on that. They might have tools or support for that, or they might basically tell us that we're set up as an unfunded project and we should do whatever we want.
Right. Well, I'm fine with funding it, but like if they can give us a checking account or something, that might start with some sort of accountability for this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. We can follow up with them and ask.
I think it would be good to get them on a call and just like ask for like how do we solve the issue of like G Suite or the issue of having a DUNS number or whatever, right? And
we got an answer on G Suite.
They said that they can do the group. The answer they gave us is that they can do groups IO or like whatever or help us set up G Suite. They didn't say how we'd go about it.
But I mean, the answer we've consistently gotten from Dolan and also from Chris is that the Linux Foundation is very hands-off. They expect people to do what makes sense for their team. And a conversation I kept trying to have with Chris was sort of we're technical people. We can do almost anything. Like, what's standard? And the answer I kept getting back was, well, different teams do it different ways and they have different needs. Like Slack has been this other thing, right? Most of the Linux Foundation teams don't sound like they don't use Slack because it doesn't scale to being where they want to go. So like people make more heavy use of mailing lists than Slack conversations, which I can understand that. So it sounds a lot like, there isn't really a very clear funding model for a lot of the little things, and I don't think we should expect much. I think we should proceed with.
Well, what do we expect? Like that's the thing is I'm okay with like them saying no, go do this on your own. But like setting up G Suite requires that you have a domain, right? And so, what is the domain that we use? Is it the Osquery.io one, or is it?
Yes, unless we want something else, I think we use Osquery.io.
Okay.
I as far as I can tell, Linux Foundation's only real ask of us has kind of been like stick them in the GitHub owners, and probably other things about like ultimately they own things, and I generally perceive that as illegal. They want the ability to step in and do stuff.
Okay, that's fine. I'll follow up with Teddy then about the domain and bootstrapping a G Suite. But I'll open an issue first, so that.
Yeah, I think I'm on board. I'm on board with just using G Suite and accepting that it costs individuals $60 a year, and that puts the minimum TSC dues at $60 a year, and I think a bunch of us are willing to kick in a couple $100 to get it rolling and be done with it.
Yep, I think that's fine.
And I know it's all a drop in the bucket for what Trail of Bits and Facebook is kind of allocating behind the scenes.
Yep. All right, guys, I'm going to bounce, but
okay,
chatting.
I'm going to take off as well.
Bye.
Thanks for joining, guys.
Good job.
Yep.
See you on Slack.